Hi everyone. So starting this week, we are going to look at, we're going to move out of the console and we are going to start look at how we get things, information, data onto our page. And so to do this, one of the things that we're going to look at is we're not going to get quite to charting yet. We're going to do that week after next or week after this. I thought it would be helpful if we're going to worry about loading data into our page, right? Up till now, we've been creating our own objects and writing them directly in our JavaScript file, but that's not a very practical way to handle large parts of the large volumes of data. That's why we look at something like JSON, JavaScript object notation, which we typically keep in separate files away from all of our JavaScript that adds interactivity and also away from our HTML. So that sort of factoring element that we started doing last week where we pulled our JavaScript out of our HTML file and put it in a separate file and included it in the HTML via our head tag is going to be a very sort of common process for us. And the way that we actually get JSON in is a little bit different, but I thought it would be helpful to work with an example. So this is a pretty straightforward, it's a line graph or a fever line, as we now know we call them, that a friend of mine did down at the Washington Post. And it's a pretty straightforward line chart. It's very nicely, it's nicely laid out, it's nicely annotated. We talked about the need to sort of highlight individual data points. We've got recessions shown in here. It's just a really clean, simple graph that shows the long-term unemployment rate, the number of folks who are in the long-term unemployment rate over the course of the last sort of 35 years. And so I wanted to use this as an example as a way to demonstrate how we might look for data that we use in charts. And I can see down in the source line here that one of the sources is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and I happen to know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is part of a research database called FRED, which is the Federal Reserve Economic Database. This comes out of the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and they have literally thousands, tens of thousands, I think maybe even over 100,000 different data series that they collect now. They don't produce them, but they do make them. They do make them available via an API, which is something that you guys should have read up on by now. So we're going to walk through sort of an example of, what's an API, a data API, and sort of how do we use this. So again, I happen to know that FRED is a thing, and in fact, I can just look up the FRED API here. And you'll see that it's under the St. Louis Fed Web Services here. And we'll look at this in a second, but I just want to point out that if I just Google long-term unemployment FRED, I can see that actually something that looks pretty relevant comes up almost immediately. And if I click on this, I see something that actually looks almost exactly identical, certainly in data, to the chart that I see here on the Washington Post. So I feel pretty good about this as a data source. Now, the thing about this view of the Federal Reserve Economic Database is that it's going to show me static data. So, for example, if I go to view data here, it's actually going to give this to me as a text file, which is not terrible. It's not great. I can also download it as like an XLS file, which again is not terrible, but not really what I'm looking for, because I want to be able to publish this on the web. And for that, I really would prefer to have JSON, right? We understand now that JSON plays really nicely with JavaScript, and so it makes it a really, really handy format for dealing with data. But one thing that I have gotten out of this is I've gotten some information about how FRED talks about the name that it uses, or really the slug. Actually, this is very, very journalism related, right? When in a newsroom, when you're sort of passing around information about a story and people are working on it, you very often give it a slug, which is a sort of 1 or 2 word compound that is used as a nickname for the story, because otherwise it can get really confusing what you're talking about. And so actually we can see that FRED does the same thing for their data series. So I've gotten some important information here because I now know that the series ID for this information I'm looking for, the civilians unemployed for 27 weeks and over, which is the technical term for the long-term unemployed, is UM27OV. And so if I come over to just what I clicked on after looking at the FRED API, I get this kind of, not so straightforward page, but I can see down here series, and specifically series and observation. So this is, I can tell from this, get the observations or data values, right? Which is what I want. I want the numbers. I want to know how many people are long-term unemployed. And so if I click on that, it's going to give me some examples. So I'm just going to go straight to the JSON example here. This is a pretty new functionality that they've added, but we love that they've done it. And I can see an example entry here and sort of what I'm going to get back. And so what I want to do is, one thing about Fred is that you need to have an API key. I happen to have one from another project, so we'll make this file available to you guys, but you should feel free to sign up for an API key from Fred because it's free, and it's really handy because you can get lots and lots of data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this, but I'm going to try it with my series ID. Now, I don't think this is going to work off the bat precisely because UMP27OV, because I'm pretty sure that API key, yeah, is not real. So I am just going to go over here and locate my own API key. Wait, don't look. And we're going to see if we can get something that looks good here. Just a second. Okay, so I'm going to put in my real API key up here. Oops, and I also screwed that up because I think this is 2.7. So you can see actually as I'm getting these error messages, right, it's giving me some information. It's saying bad request, the series does not exist. So that gives me a clue that I need to look at my series ID. Oh, that looks pretty good. So what did I hand it here? It looks like I've just given it, I've asked for everything, which is probably not what I want to do. This goes way back in time. Oh wait, no, where does it go? Oh yes, okay, so this is interesting. So it goes, that's 2014. This is a little hard to read, of course. Oh look, it goes back to July 4th, 1776. That's quite sweet, isn't it? Probably more information than we want, right? You can see observation start, 1776 to 704. Probably more information than we want. But we do have an optional parameter here, which is observation start. And so I can put in here what I want the start of the observation period to be. And so one thing I want to point out to you guys is that making an API call is literally just putting in a URL, right? We're actually just putting a URL on a web page. It's a specially formulated URL that has these particular features. It has something like series ID and API key, right? But fundamentally, we are loading a web page, right? And that it just happens that the format of that web page, as we've specified in file type here, is going to be JSON. This is very much reflective of how APIs work. In almost every API that you're going to encounter, application programming interface, you are going to work with it like this. You will experiment in the browser until you get the results that you're looking for, and then you'll literally download them. You'll just copy and paste them into a file. We'll look at some alternative ways to do this that are a bit more maintainable. There are ways that we can actually automate that download process, which we'll only be able to sort of look at cursorily in this class. But just know that this is actually how it works, right? This may be an in-class example, but it is how it actually works in the real world. So I'm going to add something to this. I want to add, and note also that the order of my parameters doesn't matter. I can put this, I can put these things wherever I want. Just the same way that when you guys create a JSON object, when you use the key, when you use that dot syntax to access a particular part of it, it doesn't matter if it's first, last, 6th, or 27th, right? You can put things in any order, they're still going to return, based on what you ask for. So I'm going to put in observation start equals, and now I'm going to look again at the format here, and it's telling me that I need to have a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and 2-digit day. So I'm going to reflect the Washington Post one, so I'm going to say 1980 0101. This is what we call SQL date format. We'll see this, you'll see this a lot. The way that we write dates with slashes is not very comprehensible to computers. And so now it looks like I've got a little bit less data. I'm going to do my JSON lint trick here, which is that I like to copy it out and put it into JSON lint just to see just so I can kind of get an eye on what I'm looking at. And right, so real-time start, real-time end. That's basically saying, when did you ask for this? What's the date that you asked for it? You guys can tell right now that it's Friday. And now it's going to tell me, so I'm now getting the data here, right? I'm getting the actual raw data. So of course, what's interesting is that the shape, another thing that I find curious or interesting about this, right, is that this shape is pretty much reflective of this shape, even though this is actually mapping percentage, and this one is mapping raw numbers. So we'll go ahead and do the raw numbers for now, and we can leave the percentage discovery as an experiment. But basically, as I alluded to before, the way that I'm going to get a copy of this data is I'm literally going to do, oops, what happened? Right, I'm literally going to do a view source on this page, if I can get the browser to let me do that. I'm going to do a view source. I'm going to select the whole thing. I'm going to open up a text edit file. Whoops, a new text edit file. I'm going to paste it in, right? I'm literally just going to paste this off the web page into my text edit file. In fact, I would probably do, you know what, I'm actually going to do better to do this, I'll just do this in text edit. Make sure you use text edit and not Word, right? We're never going to use Word in this class, just as an FYI. It adds all kinds of extra thingamabobs and invisible characters that are problematic for us. So now I'm going to save this, and I actually haven't created a folder for this project yet, so I'm going to say new folder, and I'm going to say Ajax practice. That's what I'm going to call it. Okay, I've just done it on my desktop, and I'm going to save this as I'll just call it 27OV, OV the data.json, right? So you can see I'm just adding that JSON extension because, again, JSON is just text. So you know what? You are annoying me, so I'll tell you what. Not talking to you guys, talking to the computer. So this is one of the things, hold on, instead. So if you run into this, the trick I'm going to use is I'm going to choose Make Plain Text. Okay, and you can see how it changes there, and now I'm going to save it, and you better let me save this as JSON. And then it's going to give me the option to use JSON. So there you go. If you use text edit, make sure to convert it to plain text. You can always use Aptana. Aptana will not give you that problem. And now I have my data source saved. So in the next video, what we're going to look at is how we're going to use a very popular, very common library known as jQuery, so that we can actually load this data into our page and display it in the main part of our browser window as opposed to only logging it out to the console. So I'll see you guys in a second.